Hello and welcome back to World 360. Why is the Russian Prime Minister in China? Why is a small Pacific island country's decision to ink a security deal with the US a big deal? And why is one of the poorest countries in Europe, which is economically entangled with Russia, now experiencing a wave of pro-EU sentiments? We answer this and more in today's episode. So first up, the Russian Prime Minister's visit to China. Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin arrived in Shanghai on Tuesday to attend a business forum. Now, this comes about 2 months after Chinese President Xi Jinping visited Russia earlier this year. Now, Mishustin is technically only a nominal head of state, meaning he doesn't have any real power, unlike Russian President Vladimir Putin. Fun fact, he's also a pianist. But his China trip is nonetheless important as he is slated to meet Chinese President Xi Jinping and sign a series of deals on infrastructure and trade. During his trip, he will also visit a petrochemical analysis institute in Shanghai. Therefore, this trip by the Russian Prime Minister comes at a critical time. First, Russia is being increasingly isolated on the world stage. Secondly, its economy is in dire straits and is increasingly dependent on Beijing. In fact, data shows that bilateral trade between China and Russia is booming and may hit $200 billion by the end of this year. To put that in perspective, that's almost double of what India achieved with its biggest trading partner, the US, last year at around $130 billion. So the Russia-China strategic relationship seems to be hand in hand with their economic relationship, especially after the Ukraine war. China has emerged as Russia's top energy importer, while Moscow continues to reel from Western sanctions. Now Russia will face additional sanctions from G7 countries, which recently agreed to restrict exports of industrial machinery, tools and other technology that Russia may use to build its war machine. Now, during his China trip so far, the Russian Prime Minister did make some significant announcements. He said the two countries will increase bilateral financial cooperation through local currency settlement, and he also hinted at cooperation in areas like shipbuilding and production of civilian drones. This was clearly a key visit for Mishustin because he's also brought with him a bunch of top-level business tycoons from key Russian sectors like fertilizer, steel and mining. Many of these men are also sanctioned by the West. So to recap, Russia's economic dependence on China, as well as Beijing's recent voting patterns in the UN, have led some analysts to believe that China is the one who holds the upper hand in the relationship with Russia. However, China itself is also attempting to use its partnership with Russia to present itself as a possible peacemaker in the ongoing war. Therefore, we can probably expect a lot more high-level visits between China and Russia in the months to come, so do keep an eye on that. For our second topic, we're looking at one Pacific island country which has just made waves after it agreed to sign a security deal with the US. I'm talking about Papua New Guinea. As you probably have heard, PM Modi was in Papua New Guinea to speak at a major summit attended by various Pacific island countries. This region has definitely emerged as a hotbed of geopolitical rivalry with China and the US competing for influence there. You may remember that last year, China floated a draft security deal with 10 Pacific island countries, but it didn't exactly take. Fiji was among the top opponents of the deal, arguing that it could jeopardize regional stability. China's then foreign minister later made the mistake of telling Pacific island countries to avoid being too anxious or too nervous, which many interpreted as a patronizing approach. However, some island countries went ahead and signed deals with Beijing, like the Solomon Islands. Now, coming to Papua New Guinea's security deal with the US. This decision is big news. Why? First, this was achieved despite US President Joe Biden cancelling his trip to the island country last minute. Second, Papua New Guinea is strategically located as it's just north of Australia. And third, this pact will allow the US Coast Guard to partner with Papua New Guinea to counter illegal fishing and drug smuggling. It is essentially a defense and maritime surveillance agreement which will seek to improve the island country's defense capabilities to enhance humanitarian assistance and disaster response. I mean, after all, climate change, frequency of natural disasters and rising sea levels are among the top concerns of islands in the Pacific Ocean region. For our last topic, we're looking at a small country in Europe called Moldova, where some very interesting developments are happening. Here's some background first on Moldova. It's a former Soviet republic, which is economically entangled with the Russian economy, especially when it comes to energy dependence. It also happens to be one of the poorest countries in Europe, with its economy relying heavily on agriculture. To make things more complicated, there is a small breakaway region in Moldova called Transnistria, which Russia backs as an independent state. So Moscow has definitely posed serious security concerns for Moldova. Keeping all that in mind, let's look at what has been transpiring in Moldova over the last couple of days. About 75,000 people took to the streets in Moldova's capital, pushing for the country to join the European Union. Now, this new wave of pro-EU sentiments in Moldova has definitely been triggered by the Ukraine war. As a neighbor of Ukraine, Moldova, despite its small size and struggling economy, has taken in a large amount of Ukrainian refugees. Also, Transnistria, the breakaway region, has played into the war as well, with Russia accusing Ukraine of plotting to invade the breakaway region. Keep in mind that Transnistria is a Russian-speaking region and Russian troops are stationed there, so its strategic location and demographics have easily been politicized amid the Ukraine war. But let's look at how these pro-EU sentiments in Moldova have developed over time. Since the start of the war, Moldova has positioned itself quite interestingly. It formally condemned Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, but for a very long time was hesitant to join Western sanctions. It was only after a year after the war started did it join anti-Russian sanctions just this spring. Also, Moldova's long-standing dependence on Russia for energy appears to have reduced, mainly because of payment disputes raised by Moscow itself. Moldova has therefore ramped up energy imports from the EU, and as a report by Carnegie Endowment for Peace points out, the little European country is now looking to diversify its gas suppliers and is looking to other countries like Romania, Greece, and maybe Azerbaijan too. But what's happening in Moldova isn't as surprising when you look at how many other former Soviet states like Georgia, for example, are starting to worry about their own territorial sovereignty and even fear Russian attempts to overthrow their governments and install puppet leaders. In a way, many of these countries who would have much rather preferred to stay neutral amid the Ukraine conflict, but due to physical proximity with the conflict and various entanglements with the Russian economy itself, are now having to pick a side. To put it simply, they don't want to be the next Ukraine. From the West perspective, and certainly NATO's, Moldova is a key player to have within its fold because of its strategic location near the Black Sea. Finally, you may be wondering why we're talking about protests in Moldova instead of government policy. But these didn't seem to be just any protests. They were called by Moldovan President Maia Sandu herself. So to wrap up, Moldova became an EU candidate last June, and its membership doesn't seem that far away. On 1st June, it will hold a forum of leaders from nearly all EU countries where it will be sure to make its case for membership. Thank you so much for watching. This is Pia Krishnankutty for ThePrint.